First, I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event, and I need to say that, because in other aspects I probably wouldn't.
Princess Anne sat tall in the courtroom, but her face told a different story. For the first time in years, the famously stoic royal broke down in front of everyone. Anne wasn't just sharing testimony, she was opening a part of herself the public rarely sees, one tied deeply to her mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. She spoke about a private letter Her Majesty had written just before her passing, one that Anne had kept sealed. And what was inside that letter? According to insiders, it was the Queen's final request, and it had everything to do with the future of the monarchy. Charles, already under pressure from health issues and growing public scrutiny, looked completely blindsided. He wasn't expecting Anne to bring that letter into the courtroom. He wasn't expecting her to read it aloud. As Anne's voice trembled through the Queen's last wishes, it wasn't just the content that hit hard, it was the emotion behind it. You could tell these weren't just royal obligations for her, this was personal, this was about legacy, truth, and finally speaking out after years of silence. Now, let's rewind a bit, because before this powerful moment unfolded, there were clues that something big was coming.
I'm grateful because you've come together as a group. Interestingly, if you like, I'm not here because this was my choice. You very kindly asked me to become patron of your organizations. So it's an honor for me to have all of you here as part of that.
The courtroom was quiet when Princess Anne stepped in. Anne stood before the judge with her notes in hand. Then came the words that stopped everyone in their tracks. The crown must pass through William, not just by birth, but by heart. The silence that followed was heavier than anything spoken. For a royal who rarely expresses personal opinions, especially in public and especially about succession, this was a moment of shock. Even King Charles, seated quietly to her left, was visibly shaken. Cameras caught it. A single tear, quickly wiped away, but not before the flashbulbs fired. The image was everywhere within hours. This wasn't just a sister speaking, this was a senior royal, someone who had spent her life walking the fine line between duty and family, making a public stand. And she wasn't just defending William, she was challenging the very structure of royal tradition in front of the world. But the bigger question everyone began asking was, why now? What made Anne break her silence after years of loyalty to protocol? It starts with something small, a locked wooden box tucked away in Windsor. Inside were personal items belonging to the late Queen, among them a collection of handwritten letters known within royal circles as the Windsor letters. These weren't official documents, they weren't legal directives, they were reflections. Notes the Queen had written over the years about her children, about the crown, about the future. The contents of these letters became central to the court case over the private division of her estate. One letter in particular caught everyone's attention. In it, Queen Elizabeth reflected on her hopes for the monarchy beyond her reign. She emphasized the need for a steady hand and a modern heart. While she never named a successor outright, her words leaned heavily toward William. Her tone was calm but clear. Tradition mattered, but so did the people. Stability mattered more than seniority. Anne, reading those words again during the legal proceedings, made a decision. She wasn't going to sit on the sidelines. She told the court, "The public deserves to know what the monarchy stands for. This is about trust, not just tradition." It was one thing to refer to documents, but what came next wasn't written down anywhere. It was something only Anne could bring forward. A memory from a private conversation with her mother. She spoke of a quiet walk at Balmoral. It was just the two of them, late afternoon. Elizabeth, in one of her more reflective moods, shared thoughts about what truly makes a leader. Not just titles or training, but character. She had watched William grow, through loss, through responsibility, through fatherhood, and she saw something in him that reminded her of her father, King George VI. Anne paused again in court. Then she said, she wanted someone who could lead with empathy and strength. She believed William could. That statement wasn't just emotional, it was symbolic. It echoed the very ideals Princess Diana had spoken about decades earlier. A monarchy that leads not just because of bloodline, but because of compassion. Diana had dreamed of a more human monarchy. And in that courtroom, Anne gave voice to that dream. For King Charles, it was personal. His reign had barely begun, yet here was his sister, offering the most powerful support to someone else. The look on his face said it all. He wasn't angry, he looked tired, and maybe even resigned. But beyond the royal dynamics, this moment peeled back layers the public rarely sees. It showed that behind the palace walls, behind the formality, there are very real emotions, disagreements, and loyalties. And Anne's open support for William, it wasn't just a headline, it was a glimpse into a hidden alliance, one that may have been quietly building for years.
Princess Anne's been working incredibly hard to Save the Children Fund, and I'm her biggest fan, because what she crams into a day I could never achieve. And we've always hit it off very well, and I just think she's marvelous.
To the public, Princess Anne and Princess Diana couldn't have been more different. Anne was the disciplined one. Diana was emotional and constantly in the public eye. But behind palace walls, there was a quiet understanding between them, forged in the one place the cameras couldn't reach. During Diana's most difficult years, when her marriage to Charles was unraveling and the pressures of public life became unbearable, it wasn't just friends or staff who checked in on her. Anne did too. There were late-night phone calls. Diana once confided that Anne didn't offer sympathy, she offered presence. And in a royal family where emotional distance is often the default, that meant more than words. They never posed for photos as best friends. They never did interviews praising one another, but their connection ran quietly beneath the surface. After Diana's passing, Anne was one of the few royals who didn't just send flowers or make statements. She wore one of Diana's old silver bracelets during a quiet visit to a children's hospice. So when Anne stood in court and supported William not just as heir, but as the moral center of the monarchy, it wasn't just Queen Elizabeth she was honoring. It was Diana too. Anne's words echoed both women, the Queen's quiet wisdom and Diana's hope for a gentler future. She didn't say it, but the message was clear. William was the bridge between tradition and compassion, and Anne was standing behind him. But that stance came at a cost, because the person it challenged most directly was her own brother. Anne and Charles grew up in the same palaces, walked the same royal paths, but rarely met eye to eye. Anne was all about duty. She followed protocol, kept her head down, and got on with the job. Charles leaned into philosophy, causes, and big ideas. While Anne toured horse shows and opened hospitals, Charles talked about architecture and spiritual healing. They didn't fight. They just never fully connected. Their relationship was polite, even functional, but emotionally distant. And with their mother gone, whatever was left unspoken for decades started to come out. Anne's courtroom statement wasn't an attack. It wasn't even criticism, but it was a truth Charles likely never expected to hear from her. And it cut deep. Because Anne never speaks out, ever. She's the royal family's most reliable worker, the one who attends over 400 engagements a year, supports more than 300 organizations, and does it all without scandal, drama, or attention. If the monarchy is a machine, Anne has always been its engine. So when she breaks rank, people listen. Anne said quietly in court, "I was raised to serve, not to speak." But silence now would be betrayal. It was a statement packed with weight. This wasn't about ambition or rivalry. It was about protecting something she believed in. At that moment, Anne stopped being just the loyal daughter or the hard-working royal. She became the voice of a different kind of legacy. And just when everyone thought her statement had peaked, just when they thought she'd made her point and would return to her usual silence, Anne delivered one final truth, one that turned every royal watcher's head, one that made headlines not just for what it meant, but for who it involved. As Anne stood firm, her voice steadied again, but her next words hit even harder, because they weren't just about William, they were about Catherine. For the first time, Anne revealed something the Queen had kept close to her chest, a personal reflection that was never meant for public ears. Anne quoted the Queen, "Catherine is not just dignified, she is the future." It was simple, honest, and powerful. The Queen hadn't said Catherine was perfect. She said Catherine was steady, and for a family often rocked by scandal, that kind of stability meant everything. To Elizabeth, Catherine wasn't just a supportive wife or a smiling figure at events, she was an anchor, a quiet presence with grace under pressure. She didn't chase the spotlight, she held her ground in it. And for a monarchy moving into uncertain times, the Queen clearly believed that Catherine was one of its strongest pillars. And it continued, making it clear that this wasn't her opinion, it was the Queen's. And when she said those words aloud in court, the effect was instant. Charles looked stunned. Sitting at the front of the room, Charles's eyes glistened. His posture slumped, he blinked more than usual, and then, without a single word, a tear rolled down his cheek. The cameras didn't zoom in, but they didn't have to. His mother, the one voice that mattered most, had seen something in William and Catherine that she may not have seen in him, or at least hadn't said aloud. It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't validation either. But to understand how Anne reached this point, to break decades of silence with just a few powerful sentences, we have to go back to the girl who was never raised to express, only to endure. Anne's childhood wasn't about affection. It was about formation. Raised under Queen Elizabeth's firm yet distant approach, Anne learned the royal rulebook before she could probably spell her own name. Emotions weren't part of the job. Anne grew up watching her mother juggle a nation, siblings fade into the background, and a father who rarely showed softness. She adapted, she followed the rules, and over time, she became what many called the hardest working royal. But what do y'all think? Was Anne right to reveal the Queen's private thoughts? And does this change how we see King Charles or the crown itself? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell, because the next royal chapter might be even more dramatic.